the vast majority of employees in the world would prefer to work at a company that doesn't require them to believe things that have nothing to do with what the business is. That's actually diversity and inclusion.
You're listening to the Elevate podcast, and I'm your host, Robert Glazer. Join me as I talk to world-class performers about how they build their capacity and reach greater heights in leadership, business, and life, and how you can do the same. Welcome to the Elevate podcast. Our quote for today is from Brian Chesky. Culture is 1,000 things 1,000 times. It's living the core values when you hire and when you write an email, when you're working on a project, and when you're walking in the hall. My guest today, who I'm thrilled to host for a second time on this show, is Patrick Lencioni. Pat is the co-founder and president of the Table Group and a pioneer in organizational health movement. He's the author of 13 books, which have sold over 8 million copies and been translated into more than 30 languages. As president of the Table Group, he spends his time speaking and writing about leadership, teamwork, and organizational health, and consulting with executives and their teams. And prior to founding the firm in 1997, Pat worked with Bain Company, Oracle, and Sybase. Pat, welcome back to the Elevate podcast.
It's great to be here, Robert. Can't wait to have this talk. This will be fun.
Yeah, so we talked about your life, your work, your leadership, and your first appearance on the show last year, which I would encourage listeners to go back and listen to. It's episode 261. You're returning today with a sort of specific purpose this time, and that's to talk about a recent article you wrote, How to Sow Unity in a Time of Division. This article gets into the question of how and if companies should be involved outside of their core values and purpose. And it's a topic I've really been interested in. I've been talking about for a while in parallel. I think your article was a good prompt for a discussion around this, and I'm hoping that's what we can do today, because I think there are a lot of leaders and boards grappling with this issue who need to decide on a way forward, and they're not sure what to do, and not enough people are wanting to have that open and honest dialogue. So to start us off, tell me about like the premise for this article and what prompted you to write it in the first place.
Well, the premise of the article is just that, it's almost a social contract when you hire an employee, and as you said in the opening, and you hire them because they fit your core value and they can add value to your company. You know what I mean? And fitting the core values are really important because that's what says you belong here. Any company that has a culture isn't for everyone by definition.
Right.
And so they interview people and they say, okay, you might have the requisite skills, but first and foremost, you need to fit the culture. And so when you hire somebody and then you accept them and you welcome them because they're a cultural fit, if you change that culture, you have to tell them. And if they're no longer a fit, it's cruel to actually change the culture, not tell them, and let them walk around and wonder why they're no longer welcome there, or feel welcome.
Well, I want to.
And that's
sorry, go ahead. Yeah,
what a lot of people have actually done.
Well, I want to preempt something that's in a lot of people's head. We may have talked about this last time, but this term cultural fit, I think a lot of people see this as a pretense for hiring carbon copies of each other or precluding diversity. And I know you and I agree that's not the case at all, but that any organization needs to have some common values that it sort of encompasses around. So can you talk about why cultural fit does not go against the concepts of sort of diversity and inclusion?
Well, it's actually the very thing that makes diversity and inclusion real, because unless you decide there is nothing about us that we have in common, and I don't think that's what we mean by diversity. What makes a company or a country or any organization, families, great is when they know what they believe and what they're about, and then they can be diverse around everything else. But it would be like, take any company that you know of, take a Nordstrom and say, are they welcoming diversity for people who don't like customer service? No, that doesn't mean they hate them. They just say, hey, listen, you wouldn't like it here, because that's one of the things we're all about. And every company worth anything should have a culture such that somebody might apply there and they say, you're a wonderful person, but you wouldn't like it here because the things you value and the things we value are different. And you should find a company where you would go to work every day and your values would be congruent with theirs. That's actually an act of love and service. Now, usually a company can only have 2 or 3 clear core values. And everything else outside of that, they can say, hey, diversity outside of that is good. We have to figure out a way to welcome people and include people, but not around the 2 or 3 things that make us who we are by definition.
Yeah, my analogy has always been like a university, right? There's a large public university in a city, maybe, and then there's a small rural liberal arts school, and they have totally different value propositions. And they're trying to appeal to the people who want those value propositions. And they might be great schools and win all kinds of awards, but probably the kid at one really wouldn't like the value proposition at another.
And that's good.
Yeah.
See that, because a university is not a university is not a university. a company is not a company is not a company. Everybody should find that one and that's just natural.
And look, plenty of university leaders are struggling right now to do exactly what you're saying. This is who we are and what we do, and we're not changing it because a few people want it changed, right? And I think we're seeing the danger of that. So, go ahead.
No.
Yeah.
I'm just listening.
Well, I was going to say so. The core tenet of the article is that, as you said, the healthy culture comes down to alignment. You need to clearly establish these values and mission, hire, reward, manage people based on that. And you got to respect and support people who fit the culture. But then you specifically argue that when companies try to take stances on socio-political issues unrelated to the business, it really impacts the culture. So explain your viewpoint where that may not be intuitive, because if we all share the same values, how come we don't agree on all these issues?
Oh, well, it doesn't mean we share all the same values.
Or the same
because
core
values that we share. So when a company decides, okay, we've hired these people on X, Y, and Z values, everybody is a X, Y, and Z. Doesn't mean they agree about everything. It doesn't mean they have everything in common, but we have those three things in common, let's say.
Yeah.
Then suddenly a socioeconomic or sociopolitical issue comes around and they go, we're going to take a hard stand on that. And do they ask themselves, are there a meaningful number of employees here, as many as half in many times, sometimes even more, who don't necessarily agree with that? They fit our culture, but now we've essentially decided we're going to take on a new core value. And I don't even want to use an example, because as soon as you use an example, people go, well, on that one, I agree. And it's like, yeah, but that's not the point, especially if you're a large company. If you're a small, if any company actually has the right to do this, to support those socio-political issues, as long as they say, listen, we know there's a lot of people here who don't agree with this. We just want you to know you're no longer welcome here. You're not going to feel welcome here, and you should probably move on. In other words, if they're willing to take the hit on alienating many of their employees, to speak nothing of customers, then that's courage. And I don't begrudge.
And it's not virtue signaling, because you're saying we believe in it and we're willing to take all of the associated risks and benefits and rewards of it.
Right. But the problem is most companies don't want to take the risks.
Correct.
They're saying we believe in this, and they gaslight everybody in the organization, say, well, obviously you believe in it too. And what you do is then you have large groups of employees in these big companies walking around going, oh, I have to pretend I believe in something that I don't, because they're assuming I do. They know, if they have any common sense, that many of us aren't aligned with that, but they're just going to allow us to walk around and pretend and feel excluded if people find out who we really are.
Here's a great example. And Gen Z is driving a lot of this, and they come into the workforce, and I get it. Younger generation, noble, want to change the world, want to make it better. But some of us have been in companies and been through some of these cycles around what this looks like. And one quote that in an article I wrote about what I think Gen Z really wants at work, because I thought a lot of the things were frankly very misguided. but one of the things I noted was that 41% of them said they want their company to be engaged in social causes that the employees supports. Great. What about the causes that the company that they don't support? That fundamentally seems antithetical to inclusion to me, and the whole concept of inclusion, and that I'm on board for the things that the company does that I like. But what about the ideas that you don't agree with? And I'll go back to something you said before when you said we, who is we in the company? And this is really tricky, whether you're talking about a big company or a little company.
Yeah, and we is the leaders of the company whose job it is to make that organization successful, which means to engage their employees and let them feel like they know why they're there and how to be successful. And this whole idea, what I find the hypocrisy of the inclusion thing is like, I want to include the people who agree with me and then exclude the people who don't, or I'm willing to include them as long as they don't say anything about that they disagree with me. I mean, the hypocrisy there is.
You can understand where that comes from, because you can see what's going on campuses right now. And clearly that is what has been taught. Because if that's the mindset that's coming in the workplace, this is pretty obvious to see right now for those of us who want to pay attention, which is, again, as long as you agree with me, it's fine. Or same, we have Greg Lukianoff coming to talk about free speech. Free speech is great as long as it's ideas that I agree with. And this fails the basic principles test.
The funny thing is, though, even on those college cases, I blame the administrators and the faculty more than anybody, because most of the college students, I have a kid in college, two that graduated, one going next year. I spend a lot of time on college campuses. The kids don't necessarily agree with all the crap that's going on, but they're not allowed to speak up, and they go to class and they have to pretend they agree with the professor. And when they walk around campus, they have to make sure that the people who are supporting whatever cause it is don't know that they don't agree, because they're going to get shouted down and excluded by them too. I mean, it's a fundamental hypocrisy around what real diversity and inclusion is. And so the funny thing is, these companies that are doing it are actually listening to a very loud group of people, and they're doing it at the expense of others who are like, listen, I'm not that kind of person, but I don't agree. And most of those people are thinking, if I could get out of here, I would. And I think those companies have to have the courage to either let those people go and say, you're right.
You're not advocating. We'll get to this later. You're actually just advocating pick one strategy, the other, not that either is not okay.
And really at the article, what it says is, if you're the leader of an organization that's fallen into, and so many have, I would say the vast majority of public companies have, and many large, even private companies have. What you need to do now is go, oh, wait a second. We have to pull back and acknowledge that we did something inadvertently that is actually alienating large groups of our employees, or confirm that you're glad that you did that and let those groups of employees find a place to work where they're actually truly included and welcome. Either one, you just can't have your cake and eat it.
Yeah, look, you don't go to Patagonia, work at Patagonia and trumpet fossil fuel benefits, right? It's just not, the company has never been
part of their business.
Yeah, right.
Exactly. And people knew that when they went there.
Right. I guess I guess the equivalent back to the university would be like, you accepted me into the large, state university, and then I found out you shipped me off to the small liberal arts campus, right? Which is this is not what I thought I agreed to when I accepted to come here.
Well, and as somebody who went to a liberal arts campus, liberal arts is the pursuit of the art, like the passion for learning. But what we've tended to do is make it seem more about sociopolitical causes that aren't necessarily even connected to liberal arts. So,
and someone I wrote, and as you said, there's a lot of just virtue signaling here and trying to have your cake and eat it too, in terms of, I won't get into the nuances of this, but I saw a very interesting perspective when Target was going through some of the problems last year around the displays they had during Pride Month. And basically their answer was to go take them out of all of the stores in the conservative states where the problem was. And someone said, look,
just such a clear, wanting your cake and eat it too.
Right. And some of that's virtuous. Either you believe in this enough to take the pain and the loss of customers and stuff that come with it, or you're just putting different messages to different audiences, and you're just trying to, it's kind of a marketing scam, in some way.
Yeah. Well, and what I believe it is people who have let themselves believe that all reasonable people agree with us.
Right.
And since we really don't want unreasonable people working here or shopping, and what they don't realize is there's plenty of reasonable people who don't agree with them.
Yeah. And there's plenty of issues, right?
On most issues outside of the core. You know what I mean? Right. It's like, it would be like In-N-Out Burger is a big burger place. If you don't like meat, you go eat somewhere else.
Yeah.
I asked them that. I did some work with them once, and I was once like not eating much beef. I was like, hey, are you going to have a turkey burger? And like, hey, we're a beef company.
Yeah.
Okay, that's what we do. Now, you do that knowing that certain customers and certain employees are not going to want to work there because they're like, I don't like that. I'm a vegan. They're okay with that. And that's what that means. So they hire people that are okay with beef, and they have a few core values, and they go, now, as long as you're okay with those things, you can be almost anything and work. And so I'm not actually saying that a company shouldn't adopt very powerful values around something, as long as they realize they're going to lose.
Values have to cost you something, right?
Yes.
So
you have to be willing.
We're not going to take this money because, you said, in the same way, I think companies have historically stayed out of religion, which none of us, and unfortunately, I think politics is the new religion, which is maybe why this is becoming uncomfortable. But companies used to stay out of socio-political issues. And I think some people understand the social changes that made pressure for company leaders to take action. But can you talk about where that pressure comes from?
Well, I think it comes from a culture that shames certain people for what they believe and not others. In other words, I think I think when academia and media became people now know there is no source of news that is actually trying to just tell you what's happening and let you figure it out.
Right.
And it used to be that most colleges you went to and professors were like, hey, listen, I want to teach you how to think, and I want to teach you about these issues, and I'm going to present them and let you figure them out. My job is not to be biased. My job is actually to help.
And I'm going to make you debate the position you don't agree with, right?
Right. Yeah. Because it's the university means the pursuit of truth, whatever we all have to kind of try, but they've decided, no. There is, our definition is and again, that would be okay if you were willing to, if a college were to say, this is the truth we believe, and we don't want you to pursue anything else. If you believe in that, come work here or come study here. And here's the deal. There are some companies and universities who do that, and they have every right in the world. I'm not saying that, because there should be companies out there that say, hey, there are Christian companies, there's other Jewish companies, there are atheist leaders. And they could say, hey, if that's uncomfortable for you, this probably isn't a great place for you. That's actually honest and kind.
So 3 years ago, at the end of 2020, beginning of 2021, actually, I think it was the end of 2020, a couple leaders, and obviously there was a big push after George Floyd opened up a lot of discussions, and a lot of this stuff, started becoming front and center in organizations. But I thought it was interesting because two companies in particular, Coinbase and 37 Signals, which has been known for a while, founders David Heinemeier Hansson, Jason Fried, they've both been on the podcast and are known for kind of doing the opposite of what everyone else does, right? They've been building this profitable SaaS company. That was an oxymoron for years. They eschewed venture capital. They weren't big. They were remote before everyone was remote, and they have great lives and make a ton of money. And they both kind of came out and said, we're not going to have politics at work. And Brian wrote a whole piece, and there was kind of an uproar. They actually, and what they said, to your point, was if you don't want this, you can leave. We'll pay a severance. Like if this wasn't what you thought you signed up for, but we really don't want this at work. And in the case of 37 Signals, Jason talked recently, people jumped all over them. Friends told them they'd be at the wrong side of history. No one would work for them. And you know what? People left, but plenty of other people lined up to come in and said, I don't want politics at work. And Jason was just saying in the last couple of months that a lot of these people told him he was going to be on the wrong side of history. He actually reached out to apologize, as it looks like they are on the right side of history and their companies are doing great things and having great performance and not getting distracted with things that they don't control.
Exactly. And that's and the problem here, the suffering that's going on because of this, and the reason why I'm passionate about this is not intellectual. It's not because are they on the right side or wrong? There's employees suffering who are being told, you work here, your livelihood is here. We invited you to come here. And now, if you believe different than this, you should just shut up and realize that your livelihood is on the line if we find out. I mean, this is not unlike, this is what happens in totalitarian countries.
Yeah.
And I think that honesty and transparency around this would be much better so those people could opt in or out, but they're not doing that. And when I think about what you just said about Coinbase and the other company, and I remember with the crap they took for that, think about the fact that we've made it politically incorrect to declare yourself non-political.
Right. And to say, look, we can talk about this later. I was with a coach of ours last week we've worked with for years. He works with a bunch of high growth companies. And a lot of these teams are talking about succession and next generation, and no one's raising their hands to lead. No one wants to be the CEO. They don't want. They see these increasing number of. I got to be good at the people stuff, the operation stuff, the product stuff. Now I got to worry about all of these other things that are not part of the organization, and it looks really exhausting. And it's also it's making it really hard for people to want to lead. It used to be a amazing enough thing maybe 10 years ago. If you had this little tomato canning company and you said, I'm going to treat people really well and have a really great product, that could have been enough. But for a lot of employees, no, we need to get into all these other things. And every piece of data that you have, or every coach have, every leader have around organization that lose focus or try to tackle too many things, is that their performance suffers.
Exactly. And the performance ultimately suffers. And so, but what I don't like is when they change their view because of that. The real value is, if you really believe in inclusion, then tell people what they need to believe to belong there, and don't start adding things and excluding people. And to me, it's fundamentally dishonest and cruel.
Right.
It really is. There's cruelty going on in many of the largest companies in America, because it's basically saying, hey, whatever values you thought you had starting now, those are no longer acceptable, and you should just be quiet about it.
And think about, again, what Brian did and what David and Jason did was say, we understand if this wasn't what you wanted or you want something different, we'll actually help you leave and we'll pay your severance. They were not mean about it. They just said, look, we've made a decision. And in fact, like they helped the people I think in the reverse situation, people are like, if you don't like it, get out. That's not what they said. But they owned it. And again, a lot of people focused on the 25% of people that left Basecamp that year, also under the Great Resignation timeframe anyway. So I'm not sure the alpha and beta. What they don't focus is on the 20,000 applications they got, I think, within the next 6 months.
Right. And see, that should be the proof that like, hey, there is a market for companies that don't do this.
Yeah.
In fact, I would say the vast majority of employees in the world would prefer to work at a company that doesn't require them to believe things that have nothing to do with what the business is.
Yeah.
That's actually diversity and inclusion. And the crazy thing is the majority of people in the world would like to work at a company where they're actually respected regardless of what they believe, as long as they believe in the core values and they want to add to their to the company's value. And somehow all these companies got hijacked into doing things that the majority of their employees didn't want.
Yeah, there are things that they can do that align with their values, right? And I think, so I'm bad at a lot of things. The one thing that I'm good at is seeing around corners. And when a lot of this started in 2020 and after, I said to our team, like, someone's going to get hurt. Like, there's too many issues. There's too many things going on. You can't, once you start in this, each one of these, you could say we should do this, but someone's going to get hurt. And so in my last year as CEO, I tried to put a stake in the ground on this and looked at a lot of the things that people had written. Let me just read this. I'd like to get your reflection because I'd love to. Yeah, I wrote this and it took me a while, but I was trying to make some of these points. So here's a piece of what I wrote. It said, we've always believed that what we do is just as important as what we don't. And while there's a sense of obligation to respond to all new developments happening today in real time, doing so tends to overlook nuance and complicated issues and favors expediency over thoughtful reflection, commitment, and most importantly, action. News and social media cycles should not be the barometer of morality, gravity, or prioritization. And while outrage is a powerful emotional tool and it can be the spark that lights the fire, it's not the same as action. Ultimately, we believe social change requires sustained focus, action, and prioritization. This means not putting the urgent ahead of the important or prioritizing the latest headline ahead of existing work that's already being done. We need to acknowledge that it's very difficult for a company to represent the full range of viewpoints that employees hold. And even in cases where people agree that there is a problem, they may not agree on the solution. Additionally, choosing to speak out on some issues but not others has the unintended consequence of alienating employees who may be upset that an issue or cause did not receive an official company response. Because the sad reality is there are just too many important issues happening around the world for us to take a company position on all of the ones that our employees, clients, and partners care about. So while as an organization, we may not and cannot respond to every headline, we will advocate for our employees and give them a platform and voice. To facilitate this, we give our employees the time, support, and resources they need to advocate for the causes they are passionate about, guided by our company purpose, values, and platform. We offer paid time off for employees to do volunteer work. We match personable charitable donations to nonprofit organizations that matter to our employees, and we provide internal support for affinity groups, learning sessions, and employee organized activities around specific issues. The result is a balanced employee-driven approach to social action that's not about AP the company, but about AP's people.
That is beautiful. That is beautiful. And hopefully that will, I think that for most employees at your company and in the world, they would go, that's great. And I hope if it doesn't piss off a few people, right. Then they're not understanding.
Then you're trying to, right. Someone said to me, if your speech someone doesn't hate your speech, they won't love your speech. Like if it's a warm cup of tea, it doesn't mean anything to anyone, right?
Right. And there's people that are going to go, no, that's not good. You should take a stand. And what you're just saying is, hey, listen, though, these are unreasonable people. The stand you want us to take is the opposite of the stand and they think that they're the only reasonable people in the world.
Yeah. And I struggle, again, as someone who was the leader of the organization and in a power dynamic, why my voice should be the company's voice and how a company could possibly speak for anyone. And I think I used a line similar to Brian around, again, what's also interesting is a lot of us agree on the problem, but we don't agree on the solution. And so I think go ahead, speak up. There's some issues I'm speaking up very strongly now, but I'm not pulling the company name into it. There are things that I'm personally passionate about, and someone should have an equal opportunity to do the same about things that they're passionate about.
And that's the thing, and that's fine as the leader. You just have to be aware of some people will take your passion around something and try to institutionalize it. Yeah. And you have to say, no, we cannot do that.
Yeah.
Because if we do that, we are actually sending a message to people who don't agree with me that they're probably not welcome.
There's also this pressure in a lot of organizations. There's a lot of phrases I don't like. One of my top, someone should do something, right? And so I think, again, if you have a group that wants to comment or post or take the page and represent their opinion on something for the day, great, give it to them. And then when the next person says someone should do something, we could say, well, the company didn't do something. Sarah and Jim were passionate about this issue, so they wrote a blog post about it, and we gave them a platform. If you're passionate about this issue, you can do that. And that way you don't have to answer the question, why are we jumping into this one and why are we sitting out this one? Because there's not a we, there's a people who wanted to do that. And so it's like, you can have the time, you can have the resources, you can have the co-match and go ahead. And as long as it's not offensive, go do the things you're passionate about. But it solves this someone should do something thing, which drives me insane.
There's a great saying that somebody said about surgeons. I think it was, there's a saying they have, like, don't do something, just stand there. There's a time to just think about what you're doing. Yeah. If you're constantly doing stuff. And so it's like, don't just do something, stand there. There's a time to stand in it and contemplate. And I pray about it and say, what is the right thing to do here? And sometimes it's nothing. But what I find interesting, Robert, is that there are companies out there today, like there's an airline, I can't remember which one it was, where they actually surveyed an employees about how they felt about something. And one of the people in the employees said, I wasn't comfortable with this socio-political stance you took, and they got rid of it. And I think
that's not safe. That's not inclusive, right? That's not.
Oh, yeah. No, this was a company that would have preached inclusion.
Right.
Like, we're the most inclusive, diverse company. Oh, you don't agree with that one thing over there? Then you don't belong.
Well, you could.
And what I say is this.
But you could. I was just going to say, what you could have said was, to your point, like, this is actually our belief, and we're going to go with it. So if it makes you uncomfortable, then maybe this isn't the right organization, right?
Right. The thing about it is if you were to ask the leaders of that company outside of HR, maybe, are you comfortable with 40% of our employees looking to work someplace that says, hey, we're not going to make you believe anything that you don't believe other than this about how we do business? They would say no. I mean, ask any of the Silicon Valley companies that are the worst at this, by the way.
Yeah.
Do you want to lose 30% of your engineers who don't sociopolitically align with the things you're doing? They would be like, no, we'd be screwed. But as long as we're paying them a lot, we think we can get them to be quiet and still work here.
Yeah.
And that, to me, is absolutely cruel, truly cruel.
Well, I think people also notice the double standards. Look, I give Google a lot of credit recently when they were pretty swift with the response when people started taking over offices and doing things that were clearly against their policies related to some of the stuff that's going on. And they fired all the employees and they said, we are not going to not uphold our policies. And if you think we aren't, you're fooling yourself. Now, what's interesting,
that's a step in the right direction.
What's interesting is Google's a fairly progressive company. And I actually think a lot of the people and maybe the leadership team even supported some of what the people were the cause that they were doing. But leadership did what leadership was supposed to do and say, these are the rules, irrespective of anything else, and you broke them, and we're not going to start taking over offices here, and so you're out. And that to me is when you're really willing to uphold something, when it probably goes against something you believe, is when you have integrity as a leader.
Yes, and that is a great step in the right direction. And the question is, so ask yourself, like, what's the opposite of that? What's interesting, I find, is like that you called them a progressive company. Now, I know progressive.
Yeah, I'm just on a face
liberal,
value, like the issues and things.
More liberal than what we used to consider.
Yeah.
But we call it progressive. I hate that word because it sounds like, oh, and if you're not progressive, are you regressive?
Yeah.
No. So, and what's the opposite of progressive?
I mean, very conservative, I would say.
Right.
Yeah.
And so, where's the big public very conservative?
Where are they? Where are they physically?
Which ones are they?
Oh yeah, I mean, they're probably privately held companies, more in the South. They're probably not as much the public. They're definitely not the Silicon Valley companies.
Well, and that's the funny thing about this. I think it's a telling sign that there's not big public conservative companies.
Yeah.
Because in a world of real openness, you would have big progressive ones and big conservative ones and big
like the universities with the different value props.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Where's the big conservative university?
Yeah.
And that's why I said, that's what I think is so interesting about it. It should be fine for a company to say we are progressive, but what they should be saying is, and if you're not, this is not a good place for you to work. But they're not doing that.
Right. Because that would alienate people that they that they need. So this is the core of your argument in this article. And so let's double click on this. So you're basically saying that leaders need to make a choice. They can either recommit to their original values and mission and mea culpa and be honest with employees that they're not going to focus on socio-political issues anymore and that this was the wrong thing to do. Or they can go all in on changing and this is what I like, because you're not, there's not one of the other. Or they can go all in on changing the world in these socio-political areas. I would argue they should probably pick one or two, not all, again, like any focus. But trying to straddle the two will just be untenable.
Yes. I think if you're a public company, I think you almost, because you have shareholders too, and this is I don't like it when companies go public. I always say, oh, my condolences, because suddenly it's a different animal.
Right. Trying to appease everyone. Yeah.
Yeah. And by definition, that's the structure. It's like people invest in your company. And if you play with that investment to do things that aren't actually advancing the company, but are advancing some political issue you have, that is actually, to me, that's actually should be, I don't know what that would be unethical, right? Because I invested in your company because I thought the market for widgets was going to go up. Now you're taking the money people are giving you for widgets and spending it over here on these other things, which are alienating some of your customers and blah, 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 blah. And so what does that have to do with why I invested in your company? Now, if even the investors were told, hey, if you're investing in our company, we're going to use some of that money to this. And even if that hurts our bottom line, it's worth it. Then the investors would have their eyes wide open and say, okay, yeah, I did that knowing that.
Right.
But so it's fundamentally dishonest. And so I think if you're a public company, you should almost have an ethical commitment to saying we are not going to alienate our customers or our employee or our investor, because we have a contract with them to help them achieve a return on investment that is, as long as we're legal and ethical in how we do that. Now, I think a private company is a very different thing, but nonetheless, it's the same thing that would apply. Is if you're going to take a stand, then let everybody know it and be willing to accept it and actually treat the people who don't belong anymore with dignity and love them into a place where they belong.
Well, there's let's just go to the bucket that you're going to take a stand. And let's go to this sort of premise of focus. You probably want to pick a domain tied to your business that you want to take a stand in. If you're Tom's Shoes and you're trying to end, whatever it is in shoes and walking and out, like you probably shouldn't weigh in on vaccines. And likewise, if you're a company that's trying to cure blindness and you're focused on that. So it's interesting, even if you want to go that route, if you try to boil the ocean, I'm not sure that that's going to work either, right?
Yes. And most of those, and the companies that take a stand productively are the ones that their business is related to that.
Yeah.
And nobody actually, and even if they're progressive, even if it's a company like, hey, like you mentioned Patagonia or REI or something, they're like environment.
Yes.
You're like, okay, people are buying camping equipment, they're going out in the environment. Maybe my view on the environmental stuff is not the same, but I kind of expect that. And so I get it.
You would understand why they would be vocal around issues of fossil fuel, right? It's consistent with what they're doing, whether you agree with it or not, right?
Exactly. Yeah. And then if you don't, and gosh, what would be interesting is if an employee had a different perspective, like, hey, let's take a look at like what we're looking about electric cars right now. We're realizing the environmental and human cost of electric cars is actually great. There's kids in Africa being forced to mine cobalt in what looks like a blood diamond factory. That's how they get cobalt. And then they go to China and there's like all these smelting factories that are making these batteries that are horrible for the environment. And then they don't know how to do. So there's actually an argument to be like, hey, maybe there's another way to look at this.
Right.
I would like to think a company would actually be able to entertain that conversation. But let's just say a company said, listen.
But by the way, a company with great values should, if they're presented with something that shows them that their values are inconsistent, they should look at they should look at that, right? And they should adopt
And very few of these companies today are doing that. Yeah. In fact, they're saying to disagree is tantamount to not wanting to work here. But again, you and I agree. There's companies where it makes sense for them to take on that value, or they were founded upon that value, right? Tom's Shoes. I met Tom, or the founder, not Tom, but he said, yeah, I did this because I wanted to give back shoes to kids in Africa. And that's why I did it. And it was actually not just a company for shoes. It was a cause.
Yeah.
And so people bought into that. They went to work there for that. They bought their shoes for that. And if somebody, by the way, doesn't like that, they know.
Yeah.
I can't imagine somebody not liking that. But
investors, who might want them to push the profit dial more at the expense of cost should know that that's probably not going to be the priority, right?
Exactly. So really what this is about is having the courage of your conviction and accepting the consequences of that. And you know what I find interesting, Robert? People don't want to talk about it.
Why
This
don't they want to
we've
talk
got
about
no feedback about this article.
But what's interesting is I think they're struggling with it. So I'm curious why they don't want to talk about it. Is it I wanted to talk about it.
They know.
Is it
I think they know that the cake and eat it too line is ending, and they have to choose their poison. And they're like, I don't want to choose either poison, which means it's just going to continue to descend. And the culture of their company suffers, and the productivity suffers, and morale suffers. But for them to choose one of these two ways means they would have to actually step up and say, yes, we will take the hit for that. Yes, we will take the hit for saying we went too far. And there's going to be some small group of very angry, loud employees, many of whom will work in HR, who will be pissed off at them. And that they'll have to say, we're okay with that because it's not the right thing to do.
Yeah.
Or they're going to take a stand and say, we're going to support all these things. And there's going to be a bunch of employees and customers who say, okay, now that you're clear about that and you're telling us that you don't want us around, we have to find another place. One of those two things has to happen. And I think most people are like, I don't want either one. So let me
give you an analogy that won't be controversial, but has the same dynamic just to see this at work. So after COVID, I wrote a book on how virtual teams work. And I did a lot of speaking and talking to companies around figuring out what was next, right? And one of the things in my speech was, look, you have some options, right? We're all coming back to the office and that's how it is. We have, we're all going remote and that's how it is, or we're doing some sort of hybrid. And what I was saying at the time and talking to the employees is that the stress from these employees of not knowing, the companies were all hedging.
Right.
They were afraid to tell the people which model they want. I really respected some of the financial services ones. Like, again, they may be on the wrong side of history or whatever, but they said, look, it's back to work. And if that doesn't work for you, go somewhere else. Or the others say, look, we're getting rid of the office. And if you need an office, go somewhere else, or here's our hybrid. But the ones who were hedging because they didn't want to lose anyone, I think they were going to lose more people than losing the people that weren't going to be part of their go forward model, which they would have done if they said, look, this is what we're doing and we'll help you if this isn't what you thought it was or you moved or otherwise. But the hedging just made a mess for everyone.
Yeah. Clarity is kind. Yeah. Clarity is kind. And when you do that, if you think about it, Robert, if you think about how markets work, like if people were just really honest, then the market for people that want to work at a progressive company and those that want to work at a conservative company and those that want to work with a neutral company would all
sort itself out.
Settle. Yeah. And that would be okay. And actually then people be like, I'm going to work at a progressive company and I get to be progressive. And I'm going to work at a conservative company and I get to be, or I'm going to work at a company that's not going to, that will not allow us.
I don't want either of this at work, and I'm an independent, and I'll take my politics outside of work. Thank you.
And there's probably a bell curve.
Yeah.
But what's interesting today is it's not a bell curve. It's really slanted in one direction, which means, and it doesn't matter which direction it's slanted in, that means there's a lot of people working places that feel like I have to hide who I am.
Yeah.
And what I believe in order to be considered acceptable.
Yeah, and again, not to get into the political thing, but we're about to have an election that's going to be 51-49, right? One way or the other. So it is not going to be a 70-30 landslide where everyone can say this viewpoint is in the majority. It's going to be close, which would imply that across the basket, the viewpoints are pretty. And by the way, I think the fastest growing component of that, and obviously people have to pick, unfortunately, the way we have it set up with one or the other, but are the probably middle group that doesn't see themselves affiliated with either side, but they have to choose there. But if you made them to their own group, they might actually be the largest.
Well, those are the ones that usually turn it. It's the ones, the common sense in the middle.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that's an interesting one because now if you want to talk about that and talk about, like, think of the country as a company, and that is, are there any core values left in America?
Yeah.
That's totally different. And I'm not sure there are.
I will put equal blame across all the side. I think that it's only a value if you're willing to stick with it when it doesn't go in your direction. And what I have seen equally from both sides is the ability to just embrace double standards and change the rules to get the outcome that is desired in the short term. And yeah, so it does beg the question, like you can't say these things are values. Again, free speech is an easy one to sort of look at. So I appreciate
no, but free speech is not agreed on.
No, I know. But I'm saying when I hear someone say, I believe in free speech, and let me tell you where I defended the person who I completely disagree with and think who is morally reprehensible, but I thought that they had a right to say it, right?
Exactly.
That to me is you actually, then you believe in that. in that value.
Yeah, you go back to like the core and you go like, so let's go back to the core of when they started the country in terms of what did they think, like free speech, freedom of religion, freedom of expression. And like, do we really believe those things anymore? And I say this just as an observer, I'm not sure there's even anything close to a majority of people who actually of anything that the majority of people agree on. And that's changed so much in the last 20 years, in the last 10 years.
Because as you said, I think this is the organization that being right or winning the argument of the day becomes more important than holding the principles, to be true. And once you do that, and once a leader normalizes double standards, and I think this is why so many university leaders are just because they've openly normalized double standards. And if anyone wants to argue about that, I'll sit down, and it doesn't matter which side you're on, but they different applications of the rule book in different scenarios. And when you do that, you lose your legitimacy as a leader. And the whole point of these rules, whether it's the company rules or values or the Constitution or otherwise, is they're during peacetime, right? So that when you have very difficult situations, if you try to rewrite the rules during those situations, it's really hard. If you fall back to, and one of my favorite business stories of the whole, ever was when Johnson & Johnson, when he was dealing with the Tylenol recall and put the company out of the business, the CEO went back to the founding credo of the company and used that in the press release decision about why they decided to conduct the recall, even though it was only 10 bottles or something like that.
Well, and that's what we do is organizational health. And we say that's why you have core values and a reason why we exist as a company, the fundamental reason. You go back to those again and again and again to say, what is the right thing to do? And if you stop using those, you've essentially ended the company and started a new one. But, the one thing I'll weigh in on, like things that are going on right now with the Middle East, and what amazes me more than anything is I can't believe the things that are being said about a race and a religion right now that are accepted. I mean, I never would have thought in my lifetime.
Well, it wouldn't be accepted 2 years ago, right? So
no,
yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And we're like shocked. I mean, my wife and I watch movies about World War II and about the Holocaust, and we're like, oh shit, is this even popular anymore?
Yeah.
That people think this was horrible? Because it feels like I can't believe in my lifetime this is going on here, that people are saying the most vile things about a people, regardless of how you feel about the sociopolitical realities of what's going on, that you could do that. And then it comes back down to, well, is that free speech? And if it is, then it has to be applied to everyone.
Right.
But there's certain situations.
Right. And then to your point, some apologies are needed, from the last few years, if that's the case.
Exactly. We can't pick and choose. And what it comes down to, I think, Robert, to look at this is very liberal artsy. It's integrity. And integrity means that the whole is complete and it makes sense. And integrity means if we're going to tolerate free speech, then we have to tolerate it around all of these things. Or if we're going to not tolerate this kind of speech, then we can't pick and choose when we're going to not, and that's what's happening in our society today. It's like, what does free speech mean? I don't know. Get the latest publication about who you're allowed to offend and who you're not.
Right. So let's bring it back to the leader who's listening to this. And I think it's important that we sort of went far and wide, because I think these same issues are impacting all sorts of leadership now. But
yeah,
there's a group leader, there's a CEO, there's a board chair listening to this, and they realize like they need to start somewhere, the directional shift. So, in terms of a CEO, bring it to their leadership team. Like, how do you recommend even framing or starting this conversation? Let's say they don't even know what the outcome they want it to be, but they look, after the last couple of years, like we need a revisit on this and we need a reset. Like, how does that conversation start?
I think it has to do with suffering is going to be involved in any difficult decision. And are we willing to choose it, or do we want to just let it keep happening and it's going to become more difficult to do? So in other words, do we realize when things get astray, pain is involved in bringing it back? And are we okay with the fact that we're going to choose the pain that we think is better aligned with who we are, that's going to make us stronger in the future? Or are we going to choose a way that's going to create more pain, that's going to make it harder to correct in the future? So in other words, if you go in and say, what's a solution that's not going to involve pain, you'll do what you're doing now.
Well, there's also, there's an adjunct to that, I would say, which is, who do we want to make happy? We are not going to make everyone happy, right? So clearly you can't even, it's hard to make anyone happy. We're not going to make it. So who is it most important that we make happy?
Right, exactly. And the way I look at it, like, and And it's like, and so if you're a board member, you need to have this difficult conversation. But I even think in the board meeting,
do you think boards should be bringing this to their CEOs, or CEOs should be bringing this to their boards? Which is the chicken and which is the egg?
Well, the board is supposed to be saying, hey, are you doing what's best in the best interest of this company truly? And it's like, are you trying to please the 10% of employees that are going to go protest? Or are you trying to please the 70%, regardless of their political views, that just think this is stupid that we're even doing? Right now, they're pleasing the 10%. They're pleasing the noisy right now. The noisy in our society are getting an overwhelming amount of attention.
And what does it look like? Fast forward 5 or 10 years. What does it look like if the status quo continues for organizations and for employees in those organizations?
It looks like people with certain values are going to have fewer choices about where to work. And there's going to be these ghettos of companies and markets where people feel comfortable. And then the majority of people, our kids, my kids getting out of college, are going to be told the same thing they're told going into college now. And that is, you have to parrot whatever they tell you. If you want a job or you want to get a good grade, because this is what you tell your kids in college. I mean, this is the reality of most college. If you want to get a good grade, just tell the professor you believe what they believe. And if you want to keep your job, just tell the head of whatever program is that you're on board with that.
And there's a personal cost to that, right? I think there's living your life feeling inauthentic, incongruent, right? I think we're missing what the personal, where you go to work every day and instead of being excited, you talk about bringing your whole self to work, you are going to feel inauthentic, right? And that you just need to do this job and get out of there as fast as you can.
Yeah, well, that's going to definitely happen more and more. We hired a guy from Cuba here recently, and essentially that they are the living manifestation of that. He got out of college, and they said to him, "Okay, you can have this job." He studied nuclear physics, and they said that you can have this job, and it'll pay you okay, and it's a prestigious job, but you're going to have to rat on your friends if they're not adhering to what we believe. That they were very explicit there, and he was like, "Oh crap, what am I going to do?" So they snuck out because he realized that was the rest of his life was going to be that, and that's why they don't let people leave that country. Because wouldn't it be great if they said, "Hey, this is how we live. Yeah. Anybody that wants to move to Cuba, and anybody who doesn't, you can leave."
There's plenty of people who enjoy that stuff. I've worked with them before, so yeah.
Yeah, but they don't want to live in Cuba because they want their cake and eat it too, and there's not a lot of cake there. I would actually admire people that said, "I want to live there, and I'm willing to live with the ramifications of that." But that's the problem we have today: is that people want their cake and eat it too. I really think that's the thing. I want to take stands on these issues, but I also want to be considered inclusive, and I also want the benefits of all this. And I don't want to work with people that don't agree with me, but I want people to work here and get things done. And it's like, you can't have it all. So a board member, a CEO needs to say, we have got to stop participating in this hypocritical, non-inclusive, no integrity policies, because otherwise we are just ushering our society down a place where it's really painful.
I once heard someone say, you can have anything you want, you just can't have everything all at once.
Right. Pick something. And I love that. It's like, choose your poison, choose what you want. And that's why, and people listening to this might go, I can't believe they're not talking about issues. It's like, because it's not about an individual issue. It's not about the right or the left. It's about true transparency, inclusivity, and integrity. And I refuse to say that's only on one side or the other. It has to be about the principle of openness and true tolerance. And it's okay to pick something and say, that's a core value. One of the things I didn't say at the beginning here, Robert, is that a core value is, and I love saying this, is the limit of tolerance, the limitation.
That's a great
line.
I
say this to CEOs all the time. You should be brutally intolerant of your core values being violated. And people are like, woo, brutally. Yeah. If you believe in customer service and people don't like that, don't tolerate. If somebody goes, I want to work there, you have a cool company. Okay, great. But we believe in humility. And they're like, no, I want to be arrogant. It's like, hey, there's other places to work. We are brutally intolerant of arrogance.
Yeah.
And there's companies that aren't brutally intolerant of arrogance. They're like, people that are arrogant thrive there. I've worked in some, and I thought, oh my gosh, this is actually acceptable here. But once you pick what those are, then you got to be tolerant of things beyond
and stop worrying about everyone liking you. And again, make sure that the people that like you or love you are the people that matter most, because you can't be everything to everyone.
Yeah, gosh, it's so funny. It's like if you had a group of 10 friends and 2 were really prone to vocalizing their displeasure in you, and 2 were just the sweetest, kindest people, but they would never get up in your face. And the other 6 were kind of like, hey, we just want to keep the peace. Right now, we're listening to the two angry ones that get in your face.
Yeah.
And the others are just like not happy, but they're like, I don't want to say anything because I'm going to get the wrath of those two. And I think that CEOs have to have the courage to say no.
All right. Well, Pat, thank you for joining us. I think this is going to be a really important issue in business leadership in the upcoming years, and respect that you've started the conversation and are taking a strong position on it. And by the way, it is aligned to your work as someone who focuses on organizational health.
Yeah, because there's a lot of strife in companies today caused by it. What's funny is I'm taking a strong position for inclusivity.
Yeah.
Like to clarity and inclusivity. It's weird that that's a bold stance. Can you believe that?
Yeah. It's strange times, different bedfellows, but look, I think we've had plenty of examples of poor leadership over the last couple of years. And one of the lines I've been using, I said, coming to you at a business school near you in 5 years are case studies of 2024 leadership in universities. And I think they'll probably be taught for the next few decades.
Well, if the schools are courageous enough to let them.
Yeah. Or some schools will have
there
them.
Will be schools. There will be plenty of schools out there that will not hold them up as negative.
All right. Well, Pat, we look forward to the third time.
All right. Yeah, me too. I will, Robert. Thanks so much. God bless you, buddy.
All right. To our listeners, thanks for tuning into the Elevate podcast today. We'll include links to Pat and his work on the detailed episode page at robertglazer.com. If you enjoyed today's episode, I'd appreciate if you could leave us a review, as it helps new users discover the show. Thank you again for your support. Until next time, keep elevating.